Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about our top 24 Dynasty wide receivers with tiers.
Hike!
So in this episode, Joe and I are both going to give you our top 24. We're going to start off in tier 1. Joe, who do you got?
All right, in tier number one, I've got Jamar Chase. Number 2, Justin Jefferson. Number 3, CeeDee Lamb. And number 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown.
All right. And number 1, I've got Justin Jefferson. Number 2, CeeDee Lamb. And number 3, Jamar Chase.
Wow.
Interesting. I'll talk first because I think the tomatoes are ready to get thrown at me about the whole Jamar Chase piece because people think he should be number 1. Look, I know he had a dominant year this past year, right? 1,708 yards, 17 touchdowns, 127 catches. Guy was incredible, right? Well, Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, in my opinion, have just been more consistent over these past 4 years. I mean, they're all good. You can't go wrong with any one of them, in my opinion. And we've talked about this before with him having Joe Burrow as his quarterback, and those two are locked up. Well, not yet, but more than likely will be locked up together. That is a real positive sign for him. But Justin Jefferson showed that he could be relevant no matter if Sam Darnold's the quarterback. CeeDee Lamb, we're talking about last year, had an incredible year with Dak. And if we look based on recency bias, I had him at 1 last year. We did this time. I had him as 1 because he was the best guy. And ultimately, I would very much noodled with the idea of putting Jamar Chase 1, but I just was like, you know what? I had CeeDee Lamb at number 1 for a reason. I didn't know where Justin Jefferson, how he was going to do. I was kind of generally fading him because of the whole Sam Darnold thing, but he was able to see, hey, he's quarterback proof. I think he's the best receiver in the league. So at that point, I was like, I'm not going to jump Chase all the way up to number 1 just because he had one dominant season. He's had really good seasons before. He's been a very great player. I'm not saying he hasn't been good. Don't take my words out of context here. He's a phenomenal player. We're really grasping at straws when it comes to these 3 guys, in my opinion. But I just wasn't going to change the numbers just based on 1 year.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I've been staying consistent with Jamar Chase at number 1. So I'm just staying consistent, and he's coming off a really dominant season. So I've already viewed him as the number 1 guy, and he's done nothing to make me think otherwise.
Was there ever hesitation with you as far as how the guys slotted down the rank there?
A little bit, just not so much with Chase, but Chase and Jefferson were going to be at 2. But honestly, a little bit about CeeDee Lamb, whether or not I was going to keep him at 3 or even have like Amon-Ra St. Brown up there at 4. But I just feel like Amon-Ra St. Brown's been consistently, over the last few years, and he's kind of an underrated guy, but he's consistently, performing at a high level, and I don't see much change in between him and Goff.
Yeah, see, that's interesting. I don't know why you could say that because I think with Ben Johnson leaving, that could have a significant impact.
Yeah, I feel like that could be overlooked too, though. I mean, we all thought Baker Mayfield wasn't going to be the same guy with Canales leaving, and Liam Cohen came in. Same old Bucs. Baker Mayfield performed well, so I'm trying not to overreact to that. And at the end of the day, like him and Goff and St. Brown are a staple in that Lions offense, and I don't see that changing.
I just don't know if I would say that he's in the same category, those 3. I had him in that category the last time we did this. But, I mean, you could say he was wide receiver 3 this past year. So, I mean, why wouldn't I have him in that top? I think there's a little more ambiguity there, and I don't have as much confidence in Jared Goff. There's also a lot of weapons there. There's a lot of mouths to feed.
Did you know that he averaged the same amount of fantasy points per game as Justin Jefferson in terms of PPR fantasy?
No.
They both averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game.
Interesting. I don't blame you for having him in there. I had him in there at one point. As you can see, he took a little bit of a dip. But
fair enough.
you're not going to have a critic for me on this one.
Yeah.
Why don't we head over to tier number 2? Who do you got there?
Sounds good. Tier 2, number 5, I've got Malik Neighbors. Number 6, Brian Thomas Jr. 7, Puka Nakua. 8, Drake London. And at 9, Garrett Wilson.
Interesting. At number 4, I've got Puka Nakua. 5, Malik Neighbors. 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown. 7, Brian Thomas Jr. And number 8, Marvin Harrison Jr. I saw you shaking your head there. What's that about?
I'm on Ross St. Brown all the way down at 6 for you.
Well, look, I think Puka's going to take over, man. With I mean, he already was. Cooper Kupp was already not really involved. I mean, to me, Puka Nakua, I mean, he's just going to continue. I almost considered possibly thinking about, does this guy need? Well, no, I didn't. I didn't think that he was in a tier 1 of those guys, but he certainly could be in the future. I mean, Puka's been incredible as long as he can stay healthy. Malik Neighbors, what he was able to do, he took the league by storm with, this absolute trash at the quarterback position. So those guys are just based on pure potential for me, that I think these guys could really take the next level. And I guess I'm just more excited about their ceiling. I think they have both. I guess maybe that's where it comes down to. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, and maybe this is wrong of me, but I see him more as a solid floor play. I don't see him having that incredible ceiling that a Jefferson, Lamb, Chase, and even a guy like Puka in Neighbors, because those guys are like the linchpin of the offense. Everything runs through them. With Detroit, you've got a lot. I was mentioning a little earlier. You've got a lot more options in Detroit. They don't have to run the offense through Amon-Ra. These other offenses, they have to run through these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like there's most of the time St. Brown has to get his for that offense to be successful, though. But they do. There is more options. But I mean, the fact that he averaged the same amount of points as Justin Jefferson. I don't know. Everybody, all these wide receivers, they have their, top games where they get heavily involved, and then there's some other games that they're a little disappointed. They're all kind of can have those roller coaster weeks.
Now, I do think it's interesting that you don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. in there. Is that just based on pure performance or his connection with Kyler Murray? Or because before this last year, you would have said Marvin Harrison was, I think he was your number 1 ranked rookie receiver.
Correct. Yeah, and I had him. Last like in May when we did this, I believe he was like my wide receiver 7. So it was just a lot has changed. He still could be fine. To me, there's just a lot of concerns with him. He just I need to see his route tree evolve a little more. Just seems like he's that deep pass down the field, and Kyler Murray wasn't necessarily giving him those opportunities, and when he was, they weren't connecting. So I'm a bit concerned about him, and he doesn't really create the separation I thought he might be able to get as well. But I know he's a contested catch guy, but once again, we just didn't see them connecting or him making those big plays, and maybe he does in his sophomore year.
Interesting. Now, the other thing I was a little surprised is that you had Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of Puka.
Yeah.
What was your reasoning there?
My concern for Puka is what if Matt Stafford leaves, as the rumor has it, and then who's the quarterback for the Rams? That's, I mean, he's not as surefire because, I mean, everything we're going off of, he is a great player, but it's with Matt Stafford, and he's got that timing down. I guess if Matt Stafford's not there, I guess until they find a replacement, that's kind of the reason I'm a little bit more concerned about Puka from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very fair point. You've been able to see Malik Neighbors do it with nobody. Brian Thomas, we saw him doing it with Mac Jones. So we haven't really seen that from Puka.
Right. And it's just that Rams offense is just so much of it is just timing. And I mean, he creates the separation. He can get open, and Stafford just hones in on him. But what if another quarterback necessarily doesn't do that? I mean, I still think McVay would run it to where that offense is going to run through him, but we just haven't seen it with anyone else besides Stafford. So until we do, I'm a little worried.
Yeah, my biggest concern is if those rumors will ever come to pass that McVay wants to retire early and go on a broadcast. If that were to happen, then I'd be very concerned because I think that Nakua is a product of his environment and how McVay has been able to utilize him. If he were to be plucked from there and to go be, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a team that would be,
I mean, ideally, he'd go to a team like the Falcons that has a McVay disciple there and would run the same similar style of offense.
right.
Now that McVay's been in the league, you got some guys that have been with him and they run similar offenses. So hopefully he'd go to a team like that. But I guess if he doesn't, do we see Puka being a different player in a different style of offense?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up good points. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. Let's head over to tier number 3. Who do you got there?
All right. Tier 3, number 10, I've got Nico Collins. Number 11, A.J. Brown. 12, Lad McConkey. 13, JSN. 14, Marvin Harrison Jr. And at 15, T. Higgins.
All right. So at number 9, I've got Nico Collins. Number 10, Drake London. Number 11, Garrett Wilson. Number 12, Lad McConkey. And number 13, Jackson Smith and Jigba. One of the players I think is kind of interesting, and I'll be talking about him a little bit later here. But one guy who seems to be all over the board is A.J. Brown. Obviously, you have him in tier 3. I have not talked about him yet. What made you put him in tier 3? Because as I said, mentioning, I've looked at different rankings related to him, and he seems to be his variance is very wide.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I was just looking at it from, I still think he's a productive player. I know the Philadelphia Eagles offense has shifted more towards the, run first style with Saquon Barkley and things like that, but he still creates the big plays down the field. I was comparing him to like other guys based on, average fantasy points per game in a PPR league. So he's still averaging 6.7 points, which puts him up there in terms of the other receivers around him. So that's kind of what I use to justify him having him here, at the top towards the top of the tier 3.
I am slightly surprised why you have T. Higgins in this group. I mean, I know you've always been a part of the T. Higgins fan club, but with him being a pending free agent coming off a franchise tag and not knowing where he's going to go, I think there's just a lot of ambiguity when it comes to him right now.
Sure, there is, but I mean, I still believe in T. Higgins as a player, and he's a very good wide receiver. So I have faith in
So,
him.
irregardless of where he goes, you would stick him here.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's within reason, if he goes,
He went to Carolina, you'd be still feeling like he deserves.
Oh, I'd feel pretty good if he goes to Carolina. Yeah, I think he'd be a good fit there. I'd be more concerned if maybe team like the Patriots possibly could be a little bit concerning, even though I think it'd be really good for Drake May. But even Titans, given their quarterback situation, despite the reunion with Callahan there. But outside of that, I think whoever gets him, I think he'll be in a pretty good spot, and I think his talent will garners him to be at number 15 for me, regardless.
One of the guys I had a really hard time figuring out where I was going to put him was Garrett Wilson, a guy who we've talked about as being extremely talented. I actually was kind of surprised that you had him in tier 2. I have him in tier 3. We obviously see that the Aaron Rodgers experiment didn't work out in New York, nor did it really benefit Garrett Wilson all that much. So we thought that he would excel. Hey, we were actually talking about this on a recent podcast I was on over at Dynasty Degens. But I think it's an interesting point is Garrett Wilson basically in the Terry McLaurin territory? Because who's the quarterback now? Up until this point, Terry McLaurin is 29 years old. He finally has a quarterback he can actually work with, and we saw him really kind of take it to that next level that we knew he was capable of doing. I just wonder if that's Garrett Wilson, and until he gets out of New York, is he just stuck?
Yeah, I mean, he could be. I think that's an interesting comp because, I mean, that's really what Terry McLaurin was like. He was, somewhat productive, but obviously didn't hit that really elite season until this year once he had Jaden Daniels. But I think even with the disappointing year, he still finishes the wide receiver 10 in PPR leagues. So that's kind of what I utilized. And it's hard to imagine, him having a worse kind of a worse year. I mean, I guess it is possible, but yeah, I mean, he was a disappointment, but then you look at it, he's wide receiver 10. So that's
Yeah.
why I got him at 9. And I think he's asking for a trade. I mean, I think it's possible that maybe they do trade him.
He
And
requested a trade
yeah, he wants.
officially.
I mean, whether it's officially, but rumor has it he wants to be
Mhm.
traded out of there. I don't, I haven't seen anything official, like Miles Garrett or the stuff that's going on with Cooper Cup, but
Mm.
I think he's made it known that he doesn't necessarily want to be there, and we'll see if they want to trade him or not.
One other question about this tier. How concerned are you with the OC change for Jackson Smith and Jigba? I think you and I both liked Grubb as the OC. I think it was a surprising firing that McDonald had on there. Is that concerning at all? Do you think JSN takes a step back?
Not necessarily. I don't really know how much. I think sometimes offensive coordinators can get too much credit. I don't know how much of it really was Ben Grubb or if it's just him improving as a player. Outside of his rookie year, I think there's something to say about that too. But I think what could affect him more is just depending on what's going on, with the quarterback situation. If they, if they wanted to move on from Geno or something like that.
One other guy here to talk about, and I would be talking about this tier a lot. One guy I'm really excited about briefly here, Lab McConkey. If he could continue what happened in the playoffs and he can move forward, this guy could easily move up the ranks here.
Yeah, yeah, he was an interesting guy. I mean, Lad McConkey's an interesting player, and I think he definitely has the potential to rise.
So let's head over to tier number 4. What do you got there?
All right, in tier 4 at 16, I've got Rashi Rice, 17, Devonta Smith, 18, Roma Dunze, 19, Mike Evans, and 20, Terry McLaurin.
All right, at number 14, I've got A.J. Brown, 15, Rashi Rice, 16, Roma Dunze, 17, DK Metcalf, and 18, T. Higgins. It's interesting because I think, going through our rankings here, and as I was creating them before the show, Rashi Rice, I don't know about you, but can be easily forgotten. Not that he's, I mean, he's a very good player, and honestly, you could probably have been remembered from him after the Super Bowl, what happened with the Chiefs. But I don't know. He just, I don't know. I don't know. Did you feel that way? I honestly, I had to look a little bit. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about him. I had to put him in here somewhere.
Yeah, I know. I didn't forget about him. I think it was kind of tough for me to slot him. He's a guy that obviously, heading into the season, I was really high on. He was a guy I was targeting to draft. But coming off of the injury and then just knowing too he's going to have to deal with a suspension, kind of different things I was thinking about as I slot him. But a lot of it has to deal with just how is he going to come back from the injury is my main concern.
I'm a little surprised you have Mike Evans as high as you do. He's not getting any younger. So are you just feeling that because he's been so dominant, having 1,000-yard seasons every year, that he's going to continue to do it? I mean, he's 31 years old. How much longer is he going to be playing here?
Yeah, I don't know how much longer he is. I just felt like I don't know. I thought about putting him lower, but then I was like, it just doesn't really make sense because
He's
when
a
he's
model of
out there,
consistency.
yeah, when he's out there, he just performs in
Mm.
all these 1,000-yard seasons. I mean, he continues to just get it done, and it's just one of those things. It just gets to a point where I don't want to almost feel like it's a slap in the face to have him, extremely
Okay, but
low.
if
But I
that's the
get it.
case, then where's Tyreek Hill?
Oh, he's not even in my rankings.
No, he's not in mine either. But
But I think that's different. Yeah, I know he's a similar age, but Tyreek Hill in that Miami offense, I don't know. I don't really have high hopes for him. Where
mm,
Mike Evans is that model of consistency.
interesting. One guy I'm really excited about, and I think could really take this next leap this upcoming year, is Roma Dunze. With Ben Johnson coming in, working with Caleb Williams in that offense, I think, and with the Keenan Allen, I think more likely gone. I don't see them possibly replacing. You got to remember if Ben Johnson runs the team like the Lions were, they did not have a lot of wide receiver depth. You're talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then you're talking about Jameson Williams. That's about it. Everybody else, Khalif Raymond, Tim Patrick, right? Josh Reynolds, these were guys that are just kind of street free agents that they could go out and get. So if that's the case, I don't think they'll bring somebody to replace a guy like Allen. So you're talking about DJ Moore and Odunze, and that's it. And you saw there are a lot of games where Caleb was looking Odunze's way, and they had a rapport. So I think Odunze could take a real rise here.
Yeah, I definitely could. I mean, that was the rapport that he had with Caleb Williams, and just seeing it even, as it went back to training camp when things were breaking down. Caleb was going Robadunze's way. It just seemed like they hit it off right off the bat. As two incoming rookies, had that rapport, and that's why I like his potential upside. And you're not wrong. I think if the Bears do add something, I think it would be more of a speed guy, somebody to really take the top off the defense, similar, get their Jameson Williams type of player that they don't really have on the roster right now.
So you had no concerns with Devonta Smith here?
What is the concerns?
Oh, not necessarily concerns. I mean, I honestly think he's very overrated.
Oh, I mean, you'd think he's overrated. I guess that's fair.
Wide receiver 27 this past season, wide receiver 19 the year before that, wide receiver 9, which was his best season, and then wide receiver 29. I understand he's 26 years old. The thought would be that A.J. Brown would pass the baton to him and he'd be the guy. I don't know if he can be the guy.
No, as we talked about before, I don't think he can be the guy, but we see, wide receiver 2 still perform well, a la T. Higgins type of player. I think that's the kind of guy he could be, a great support cast for, a bigger bodied, true number 1 wide receiver, kind of what he has in A.J. Brown. I get that he's been, inconsistent in terms of where his wide receiver finishes, but still think he's a, talented player. And, he's also young enough in Dynasty to be held in higher regard.
All right, Joe, let's head over to the last tier. What do you got there?
All right, to my last tier at 21, I've got Zay Flowers, 22, Chris Olave, 23, Xavier Worthy, and at 24, DJ Moore.
All right, at number 19, I've got Devonta Smith, 20, DJ Moore, 21, Zay Flowers, 22, Xavier Worthy, 23, Chris Olave, and 24, Terry McLaurin. I will say one of my biggest takeaways from going through all this, man, there's some really talented receivers in the league right now.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there are players that I was looking at, I'm like, wow, I'm leaving these guys off of top 24. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, forming the 5th tier was pretty tough for me, just figuring out what players that I was going to ultimately leave off, and then, who was going to make the cut. I mean, you're not wrong that the talent, around that area in the 20s was definitely tough to decipher and figure out who I was going to include here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we could have expanded it if we went more than 5 tiers. We tried to keep it to 5 tiers just to keep it a little more constrained. I'm a little surprised how high you have Xavier Worthy, because you've always said that you haven't really been a big believer in him, but he has shown out here in the playoffs and had some nice plays in the Super Bowl. Are you getting the sense that he's starting to come on here?
Possibly. I mean, my biggest concern was he was just kind of going to be that one-trick pony, with those deep fly routes. But seeing how the Chiefs were utilizing him in multiple different ways, I'm curious to see if it changes, like once Rashee Rice comes back, like if they're still going to use him in all those different facets. But I was worried about him being a gadget guy. It looks like they have more ideas for him than just being a gadget guy. So, I mean, I've got him at 23 out of 24. I mean, that's not crazy.
No, I know. I just wondered. I don't think it's crazy at all. I think it makes a ton of sense. I mean, heck, I have him at 22.
Right.
So I'm not saying that I think
you were thinking I wasn't going to have him in the top 24.
No. Based on what
okay.
I mean, you said he was skin and bones. I didn't think that you would actually have him in the top 24.
Yeah, I mean, he is skin and bones. There's no doubt about it. But his speed definitely does play. And like I said, I think I wasn't sure how the Chiefs were going to utilize him, but seeing how they're utilizing him, then not only in the run game, but just those short, quick passes too, showing the opportunities that he's going to have moving forward.
One other guy here that I think was probably one of the hardest. I mean, we had a few players to talk about. One of the hardest to do is Chris Olave.
Yeah.
Because he's another. We're talking about a gambler situation. We talked about it in our most recent episode with the running backs with Christian McCaffrey. A guy who has been very good in his career when he's been healthy and on the field. From everything that it seems to indicate, he does not want to be in New Orleans. Now, if Kellen Moore, who was the OC for the Eagles, winning the Super Bowl in New Orleans, by the way, if he goes to New Orleans and becomes the head coach, does that breathe new life in the situation? Does Olave want to give it a chance? Or are we talking about Olave wanting to get traded out of there, which I wouldn't be surprised if he demanded for that. He is one of the toughest guys because I feel like I sometimes get the most amount of questions, whether people reaching out in direct messages on X or just in general, as far as, just people in the comments, is what do you do with a guy of Olave? Do you trade your low first round pick, your early second to acquire Chris Olave? It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, that is tough. He was one of the tougher players to slot because he's obviously a really talented player, but he's also got the concussion issues. And that, I mean, if, a couple more hits and who knows, a couple more concussions, and I don't know if maybe he calls it a career. But as far as New Orleans goes, I think his biggest part is not New Orleans. I think it's more so Derek Carr. I mean, you see he says that Derek Carr throws those hospital balls and is putting him in harm's way to get those concussions. So I wonder if it's more of a Derek Carr issue and not necessarily a New Orleans issue. So maybe if they move on from Carr, maybe he'd be all right in New Orleans. But nonetheless, that also makes it a tricky situation because it's like more instability, with that offense, not only at the head coaching position, but just who's going to be the quarterback. Is it Derek Carr? Is they going to roll with Spencer Rattler? Are they going to bring in somebody else, maybe draft one? Who really knows?
Yeah, because that quarterback situation is not resolved. And I think they did say that there would be multiple suitors for Derek Carr, which shocks me. I don't
there's
know
a lot of quarterback needy teams, though, and this is not the quarterback draft class. So
I guess, but what is Derek Carr showing to think that you'd want him?
I mean, he's shown flashes.
Maybe when John Gruden was the head coach, that was maybe he looked the best. There's no doubt about that. But
yeah, I just wonder if you get these offensive-minded guys and they just feel like they can correct people or get the best out of them, and who knows, maybe somebody else can, like John Gruden was able to do, figure out what he likes and cater an offense to him, and maybe that's what he really needs. I mean, let's face it, I don't think he's had the best offensive coordinators when he's been with New Orleans.
No, absolutely not. I think he would do better off if he got out of New Orleans, but time will tell.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be shocked if it happened. I wouldn't be shocked.
No, I wouldn't be shocked either. I think it's more of I think it'll happen more likely than not.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about our top 24 Dynasty wide receiver rankings with tiers. If you have comments, go ahead and put it below this episode. Happy to hear what you have to say. Have some discourse as to what you think. We're going to be going through every position here. Quarterbacks, honestly, were pretty easy compared to running backs and receivers. These two were a gauntlet. Be curious to see how the rest of it goes here down the stretch. As we talk about IDP as well, we'll go through the defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker, corner, safety. But thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.